McDonald's Quarter Pounder is arguably the chain's most iconic sandwich outside of the Big Mac itself. But where did this heavyweight hero come from? And how has it stayed so popular despite being so simple? Well, today we're weighing in on the history of the Quarter Pounder. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other big-time burgers you would like to hear about next. Okay, why does it always feel heavier after you eat it? The Quarter Pounder was originally created by a McDonald's franchisee named Horatio J. Quarter Pounder. Okay, his name was actually Al Bernardine. But you have to admit that Horatio J. Quarter Pounder is way more fun. Bernardine was a former McDonald's vice president of product development, whose previous claim to fame was being the guy who switched the chain over to using frozen French fries. He was also instrumental in the development of the Filet-O-Fish, as well as the company's cherry and apple pies. But in 1970, he decided to quit his VP gig and buy two of the company's franchises located in Fremont, California. And it was at those locations that he started tinkering with some new potential menu items, including the Quarter Pounder. Bernardine came up with the idea because he wanted to make a burger for the adult who wanted a higher ratio of meat to bun. The name Quarter Pounder is a reference to the item's pre-cooked weight, which is, wait for it, 1/4 of a pound. The Quarter Pounder made its debut in 1971, and Bernardine originally marketed it with the slogan, "Today Fremont, tomorrow the world," which kind of sounds like a threat, albeit a delicious one. But if people were intimidated by his ambitions, they definitely did not let it stop them from buying his new burgers. The Quarter Pounder was popular in California, and by 1973, it was added to the national menu. Back in 1973, McDonald's menu was still fairly limited, so the arrival of the Quarter Pounder, which at the time cost just 60 cents, was greeted with a good deal of excitement. The new burger was an instant hit and quickly became one of McDonald's best-selling items. In fact, it was such a big deal, it started to change people's perception of McDonald's. It was always a popular spot for lunch, but thanks to the Quarter Pounder, it increasingly became a family destination for dinner. That image boost eventually convinced McDonald's to put the item on its menus worldwide. But as the company would quickly discover, the US is one of only 3 countries that still uses the imperial system of measurements. The other 2 are Myanmar and Liberia, and they both use it alongside the metric system. In other words, most people around the world don't actually know what a pound is, much less a quarter of one. Even so, in a handful of countries, McDonald's just directly translated the name anyway, resulting in names that were essentially gibberish. For example, in Japan, where the burger is now discontinued, McDonald's just phonetically translated the name as Quota Pounda. And in Mexico, it was called the Cuarto de Libra. The sandwich was initially sold in Australia and New Zealand as the Cheeseburger Deluxe, but eventually the name reverted to the Quarter Pounder. However, they're always careful to note its weight in a measurement the locals will understand: 113 grams. And if you've ever seen Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, then you've already heard that in France, the sandwich is called a Royale with cheese. And even though they understand the imperial system in the UK, they similarly refer to the item as the McRoyal in order to avoid confusion with the Quarter Pounder served at the local fast food chain, British Wimpy. Germany and Austria call it the Hamburger Royale. In Spain, it's the Cuarto de Libra con queso. Brazilians can order it as the Cuarto con queijo. And in Quebec, it's the Quart de Livre. The Quarter Pounder has more aliases than a secret agent. As we noted earlier, the Quarter Pounder weighs 1/4 of a pound prior to being cooked. After meeting its destiny on the grill, it weighs closer to 2.8 grams. That's obviously less, but it still makes the biggest patty on McDonald's regular menu, which presumably accounts for its popularity. And if that's the case, it stands to reason that an even bigger burger at the same price would be even more popular. That's why, in the 1980s, rival burger and root beer chain A&W decided to one-up McDonald's by offering customers a third pounder. But the third pounder was a massive flop, and nobody could figure out why. At first, according to Alfred Taubman, then owner of A&W, the company conducted a focus group to find out what went wrong, and discovered that customers thought 1/3 of a pound was less than 1/4, because 3 is less than 4. We imagine this was particularly frustrating for A&W because the third pounder also tended to beat the quarter pounder in taste tests. So it was bigger and apparently better, but that hadn't translated into sales. The chain eventually acknowledged the problem with the sarcastic new marketing slogan, "The customer, regardless of his or her proficiency with fractions, is always right." And in 2021, they revived the third pounder under the humorous name 3/9 Burger to slightly better results. Meanwhile, McDonald's, apparently jealous of A&W's spectacular failure, eventually released their own Angus third pounder in 2007, but it was a bomb. They tried again more recently with a sirloin third pounder, but that too has disappeared from the menu. That's one cursed fraction. The quarter pounder, on the other hand, is still going strong. McDonald's isn't the only game in town when it comes to heavyweight burgers. Heck, McDonald's wasn't even the first chain to sell a quarter pounder. As far as anyone can tell, that distinction actually goes to Whataburger. Their original #1 has a pre-cooked weight of a quarter pound, and they've been selling them since way back in 1950. It initially cost 25 cents, or a quarter of a dollar, but was quickly jacked up to 35. After all, they couldn't just give them away. Meanwhile, Burger King's Whopper, which begins its flame-broiled life as a beef patty weighing roughly a quarter of a pound, has been on their menu since 1957, when their founder stole the idea from a competing burger joint. Now generally considered the chief competitor for the McDonald's Quarter Pounder, the Whopper's patty is actually a few grams of meat larger than McDonald's patty. It also comes with more toppings. These days, any burger joint worth its fry salt has a quarter-pound slamwich. For example, Wendy's has the Dave Single, with a pre-cooked weight of about a quarter of a pound. Like the Whopper, it also comes with more toppings than Mickey D's burger. The story of the Quarter Pounder is largely one of success, but as always, there were a few hiccups along the way. For example, McDonald's debuted the Quarter Pounder in Japan in November 2008, and to mark the occasion, McDonald's of Japan rebranded 2 Tokyo restaurants as Special Quarter Pounder restaurants that only sold Quarter Pounder meals. The promotion seemed to have worked wonders when the burger made its debut in the Kansai region a month later. According to reports, 15,000 people lined up over the course of the day to get one, as many as 2,000 at a time. But it later came to light that McDonald's had paid at least 1,000 of those people to stand in the line. The company claimed they were just there for product monitoring purposes, but it still looks like the hamburger equivalent of buying Instagram followers. Nonetheless, the launch was successful, and the burger became popular in Japan, which is why it was so strange when McDonald's abruptly removed it from their menus in 2017. No official reason was given for the removal, but a company spokesman claimed the change was made in service of creatively revamping the menu, rather than because the burger was a poor seller. Whatever the case, Japanese McDonald's customers were not pleased. And in 2024, McDonald's had to stop selling Quarter Pounders in 5 U.S. states after the sandwich was linked to an E. coli outbreak that affected roughly 75 people, resulting in 22 hospitalizations and 1 death. It was eventually determined that the E. coli was tied to the slivered onions used on the burgers. Once that connection was made, Quarter Pounders were put back on the menus across the country, but temporarily without the onions. You just have to bring your own. If you've been a fan of the Quarter Pounder for a while, then way back in 2018, you might have noticed that they started tasting noticeably better. Well, that change was not your imagination, and it wasn't because they switched to Soylent Green. In 2018, McDonald's decided to start making the Quarter Pounder from 100% fresh beef. Prior to that, the beef used in the Quarter Pounder was frozen, which dramatically affected the taste. But making the switch wasn't easy, not even for a giant like McDonald's. In fact, the company had been working on the logistics of using fresh beef for a full 3 years before they finally pulled the trigger. But it would turn out to be worth it. After changing to fresh beef, Quarter Pounder sales exploded. In just the first 3 months, McDonald's sold 40 million more Quarter Pounders than they had in the same period from the year before. The chain continues to use fresh meat today, and the Quarter Pounder remains free of artificial preservatives and flavors. Just don't hold your breath for another third pounder. So what do you think? Are you a fan of the McDonald's Quarter Pounder, or is another chain's biggest burger your favorite? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other weird history food videos.